if you're listening where you're listening, go on to my YouTube page at youtube.com/Paul F Comedy and watch the fun. If you haven't already, subscribe, review, tell your friends. Thank you again, all of you, for making Singles Only podcast the best podcast of 2020 in the Chicago Reader. That is warming my heart still to this day. But let's just get into it. You guys already know our sponsors. Always support them. By now, you know that I'm a lawyer, right? Everyone does. And I don't really practice anymore, although I still have a license. But when I need a lawyer, and I do often need a lawyer, I contact my friend Scott Shapiro. If you're injured on the job or need compensation, you're entitled to payment for more than you know. A lot of times companies will try to settle with you so you don't get a lawyer because they don't want you to know all the monies you're entitled to. Scott Shapiro has been helping injured workers for over 20 years. In addition, his firm handles multiple other cases, including personal injury cases and entertainment law issues. He has handled a lot of my entertainment stuff as well as those of guests on the show and listeners. So you need a lawyer, sure, you can consult me. But if you want a free consultation from the best, don't take any chances. Contact my friend, Scott Shapiro. His number, 312-648-8800, or check out his website, scottshapirolegal.com. There are other Scott Shapiros. Make sure you call the right one, 312-648-8800, or scottshapirolegal.com. Tell him I sent you, and he will be very happy. We're going to get into the episode. This episode, we have a very special guest. I'm excited to talk to her. She's a creator and host of the Game Show of Love. Start clapping right now or making noise at your own desk or your car for Emma Mankey Hidem. There you are.
Hello.
Yeah, I forced you to duck there too low, huh? Well, how are you, Emma?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for doing it. So now you have the Game Show of Love. So you are connecting other people,
yes.
Essentially, and yet you have not been able to connect yourself.
Yeah, I started the game show during the pandemic, and I haven't honestly put a lot of effort into dating during the pandemic because it just didn't necessarily feel like something worth the effort. I'm not a big fan of the apps, so. And,
why aren't you a fan of the apps?
I find them to be very inefficient, and as a woman, sometimes a bit traumatic, you know, like unsolicited dick pics and such. And so I've managed to stay off the apps for several years. And I kind of have a rule about not dating anybody from my show. And that may change as time goes on. But you know, it's like I'm in a kind of like a power position, and I also don't want to poach my own contestants.
Sure.
So that's, you know, even though I do now have this sort of massive pool of single people to theoretically pull from, I feel like I'm kind of trying to stay away from doing that.
That is interesting. But as far as the rule, now that the game's been going on for quite some time, there has to be like a 90-day rule if like you reach back out to somebody.
Yeah, certainly. I would consider dating a past contestant.
Okay.
I think, I just got to let some time pass and wait till that power dynamic sort of shifts, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of like you did employ them to be on the show technically, so legal. But anyway, we won't get into that. So you didn't date during the pandemic, and you're not a fan of the apps. What are the ways that you are meeting people then, when you were meeting people?
I mean, I guess I've been pretty lucky in the past several years. I've been able to meet people in person. So, you know, at a party or through friends, obviously during the pandemic, that's not so much an option.
Yeah.
But like, even actually, like I did date somebody briefly during the pandemic who I met at a friend's like small outdoor birthday gathering. So, you know, it still has been a little bit possible to meet people in person. And I'm a big proponent of that when possible. I know it can be hard, but I think it's like you get a sense of your chemistry a little bit right away. You don't have to have all these text conversations and then meet in person to find out that, oh, actually, like we're not compatible at all. So whenever possible, I have been trying to meet people naturally in person.
Did you do any of the Zoom dating during the pandemic too? Like where you went on a Zoom date with somebody? I mean,
yeah, I right before the pandemic, right before the lockdown, I was seeing somebody, and we'd only been on a couple of dates, but we did try to do the Zoom dating thing for a while during the lockdown. The problem was he worked in retail, and so as the pandemic dragged on, and I felt like I still couldn't see him in person, eventually we kind of just called it, because it was like, well, we're not going to like basically date long distance for what's going on, now over a year. So yeah, unfortunately, I did try the Zoom dating thing, but with no end in sight, we ended up ending it.
What about now?
Now I've been.
No, I mean, with that, why can't you reconnect now that it's over technically?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe when I'm fully vaccinated, we'll see. But yeah, I mean, I think until then, it's still kind of a moot point for me. Also, because I have roommates, and so it's also not just about me. Because if it were just about me, honestly, I might have taken the risk. But it's also about roommates, and so I still have to keep them in account, even if I'm vaccinated and stuff. So yeah.
You mentioned that you like that you find out if there's instant chemistry when you do it in real life versus on the apps. And I agree with that. I think that in the old days, that was definitely how things work. But I think for the apps, they do provide one cool thing where, especially like Hinge and some of the ones where you have all their information, that 3 or 4 dates in, like something crazy doesn't come out of the left field. So like, for example, if you're into politics or anti-racism, something won't pop up. Whereas like if you have like their idea of their certain background and all their information, their wants, desires, or even like with drugs, that's something important to you. So there is that to be said, that you might not find out about chemistry, but at least like you haven't invested in someone mentally and physically, and then all of a sudden find out, oh, you're a skinhead.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. Although I will say, like, I used to love the apps. Like when OkCupid, before the swiping apps took over, OkCupid in particular was fantastic. They had all those questions. You could weed out red flags immediately, like, oh, like, I don't want kids. Does that person want kids? I don't typically date smokers. Does that person smoke? And then, there's like the compatibility quiz, and people used to write a lot more. But I found even on and I mean, I haven't been on Hinge, but from what I've seen on other people's profiles, to weed that stuff out, that does rely on people saying that. And things like drugs or even sometimes politics are not there, might avoid putting that on there. In DC, people are pretty political, so they probably won't avoid it. But I have even heard of like Trump supporters in the area not putting that on their profile because this area is so traditionally liberal. And I know I've heard they've been kind of struggling to find people. So like they may be omitting that too. So, you are still relying on them to actually put that information on there. And I mean, like it used to be so efficient, but then like with the way the swiping apps went and people writing less and less about themselves, it's just not as efficient anymore.
Well, the thing is, well, first of all, don't they have a Trump app now? Like,
I think so, yeah.
And I do think that people lie about that too. They all say if they are liberal or they are conservative, they just put moderate, depending on what state you're in.
Yeah.
And I it's kind of funny that I actually had moderate on there because I feel like I am. And and people were like, oh, so are you like when I was on the road, people are like, oh, so you a Trump supporter? I'm like, no, actually not. But anyway, I do think that I wasn't on the apps until they had the swiping thing, the feature. And I think that there was like this negative connotation with the apps for so long, but now it's like, I think, especially with the pandemic, they got a huge boost, I think.
Yeah.
With that being the primary way people have met. So I think it's hard for people that are anti-apps now to at least use it partially.
Yeah. I know a ton of people who got back on reluctantly because it was just the only way to meet people. It's part of what made me decide to do the show was because like in the beginning of the pandemic, all my client work got canceled and I was like trying to figure out what to do. And so many people were like, I don't want to get back on the apps, but like I still want to date. Like, how am I going to meet new people? And that's part of how I came up with the idea for the show, because like I also did not want to get back on the apps. And I know like a lot of people did, but like half-heartedly. And even, it's interesting because before the pandemic, app adoption was actually going down, or at least slowing down. And so like that people were like fatigued about them.
Sure.
And this kind of like, you know, reinvigorated them. But I think people are getting fatigued again, especially as this has been dragging on for a year. So, you know.
Oh, I didn't know that their numbers were down before the pandemic. Maybe they created this whole thing. That's
the new conspiracy theory.
Oh, we know it's man-made now, they're saying. But anyway, but you came up with this idea, but you can't really insert yourself into the show, can you?
I've had people tell me that I should go on as a contestant.
You have someone co-produce it or run it for when you are.
Yeah, again, it kind of comes back to that power dynamic, because I'm still the one like people are applying to. I'm still the one interviewing people. I'm still the one making the casting decisions. And so I don't know. I don't want people being like, oh, Emma handpicked these people for herself, you know, or whatever. And some people have been like, whatever, so what? Like, you work hard on the show, even if you did that, who would care? But like, I care. Yeah. And you know, I don't know. I don't feel the need. I'm not like that intensely into dating right now, so I'm kind of like cool just being single.
But you are kind of like handpicking people anyway for other people to try to help them find the right match. You're not going to put a bunch of contestants on that are not, you know, unless they're saying that you're going to save the best for your episode or something like that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what I would be worried about them saying. But yeah, and certainly I try to make sure that people are compatible, that people have interests in common, and you know, that I'm not putting on like one Trump supporter with 5 very liberals, although that has happened because maybe they haven't been vocal about the fact that they are Trump supporters.
I think it's so funny that that's the go-to now for compatibility because we're so divided. But like, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, my fans are probably tired of hearing, but my parents are on opposite spectrums. Like they're going to be further politically apart. They're together for 54 years now. So there is that possibility where, I mean, I think with Trump, you have a different dynamic, but I think it's funny that that's like the thing that drives us apart. For you, what are your, I mean, you said smoking, but like, what are the other things that are like deal breakers for you when you do start dating?
I mean, to be honest, I would not be able to date a Trump supporter personally. Sure. And so that would be a deal breaker. You know, if somebody's racist or sexist, those are big ones for me. I mean, like, that kind of is why I would never be a Trump supporter.
I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, you know, I prefer not to date smokers. Somebody who doesn't like dogs. I have 2 dogs, so that would be kind of a problem. You know, other than that, I can't think of any overt ones offhand, but yeah.
Well, when was the last time you said you were dating someone during the beginning of the pandemic? When was the last time you were in a serious relationship?
Oh, in a serious relationship?
Well, something like monogamous or whatever you call serious, whatever you entitle serious.
I mean, a serious relationship, I think my last serious relationship ended the August before the pandemic started.
How long was that? How long did that relationship last?
That was like a year and a half.
Oh, that's a serious relationship.
Something like that. Yeah. But it ended very badly. And so I definitely was like, I'm good with dating for a while.
What do you mean? Can you tell us a little bit why it ended badly?
I mean, he cheated on me. So there's that. But yeah.
Do you want to get married and have kids, a traditional or one or the other?
I'm not super traditional. I don't want kids, although I'm like open to the idea of like maybe adopting kids far in the future or something like that. Marriage, I could go either way. Like, I would be happy to get married. I would be happy to not get married. I do want like a partner, you know, like a monogamous partner, but what that looks like doesn't matter so much to me. Like, the paperwork doesn't matter so much to me.
Okay, so that seems, so if you're not having kids, then there's really, you know, you can stay single as long as you want.
Yeah, I feel like if I got serious with a partner, basically we'd end up like assessing the tax benefits of it, and if it was like beneficial financially to get married, then we would, and if not, then we wouldn't, and you know, whatever.
Is 1.5 years the longest relationship you've been in?
No, I was in a, off and on 7-year relationship in my 20s. So we broke up a couple of times because we were long distance for parts of it. But that's actually what ended up kind of bringing me to DC. I was living in New York City before that, and he was living in Pennsylvania, and then he got offered a job here. And I had some friends who had like a fair amount of success in the video production community here. So I came down here and gave it a shot. I gave it like 3 months. I sublet my apartment in New York for 3 months. And I was like, if I don't have a job in DC in 3 months, then I'll come back. But I got a job in DC within a couple of weeks of being here. And I've been here now for over a decade.
And what happened to that guy? Are you still in touch with him?
We do share custody of our 2 dogs. So to that extent, I am in touch with him. But he also cheated on me. I've had some bad luck in that arena. So that also didn't end the best.
Okay. Well, what do you think of this fact that you have at least a somewhat pattern of cheating in your relationships? Do you think that it's possible that the traditional monogamous relationship is dead?
I kind of do. And I've experimented with polyamory off and on, and I'm also not opposed to that as like a future relationship structure. I just do still want like a primary partner, like,
sure,
you know, somebody who's like my person and I'm their priority no matter what. But I'm open to polyamory, and it's something that I've experimented with a little bit in the past. I think you have to be so good at communication. And so like in the past, when I experimented with it, the first time it didn't go very well because we were all new to it. We didn't have that like communication background. But then like the second time I experimented with it, the main person that I was seeing had much more experience, was so good at communication. And I learned like so much, even just about any relationship.
Yeah.
Because he was just such a good communicator, so good at checking in, so good at setting expectations. Yeah. And I learned a lot from that. So I think, I don't want to say monogamy is dead, but I think that, you know, so many people cheat anyway that it's like, well, why don't we just be honest about it and open about it?
I think that I kind of like go back and forth, you know, because I think polyamory sounds great on paper, but I also think it's kind of weird to like be so vocal about what you're doing. It's almost like throwing it in someone's face. And I don't know if my ego can necessarily handle that. But I also know that monogamy doesn't work. And there's a book, Sex at Dawn, which I talk about a lot, where they say that it's not natural. And that's why we put all this undue pressure on a monogamous traditional marriage, and it's never going to work. And there's so much shame in, you know, divorce and all that, whether it's religious shame or whatever. Yeah. And I think it's just, there's got to be some balance. Like I always think of like polyamory as like a good answer, but then we've had guests who are polyamorous and they say, oh yeah, so you tell them, you ask them about their dates, and I'm like, well, I don't want to hear about that. I do think it's cool that, you know, I think, because I've been cheated on too, and I feel like now when I go into a relationship, I just assume it's happening. And when you go with that level of, if you go into that, it's like, okay, you know that this person cares about you, but they also have needs, whether it's physical or mental or whatever, that they have to fulfill, and you just have to hope it doesn't end in shame or disappointment.
Yeah, you know, I think that's really true. You know, we have set these like Disney level expectations that like one person can be everything to you. And that's just an unreasonable expectation to put on anybody in your life. And so like one of the things I like about polyamory is you can get your different needs met by different people. And the other thing is, you know, you can structure it however you want to. So you could be polyamorous and just say, I don't really want to hear about your other partners.
Yes.
You know, and that is an option. I think a lot of people have been trying to lean more toward like being open about it, but just because sometimes what you don't know can also create jealousy. Sure. But you know, it really, like, the cool thing about it is it's like up to every individual couple or throuple or whatever your relationship structure is to decide your own rules. And that's like the really cool thing. It also does make it a lot more complicated, and you have to communicate a lot better. And then the other interesting thing is that I've heard statistics that say that polyamorous people are just as likely to break the rules of their relationships as monogamous people. And I don't know if, like, I wish I had like the article or whatever to back that up, but I thought that was interesting when I read it, because, you know, I think it's like people just are inclined to like do what they want regardless of the rules. So.
Yeah, there's a sense of entitlement that like even when there are rules, you're going to break them. That's interesting. And I didn't know that you can do it. I mean, I guess it makes sense that you can just do it with a don't ask, don't tell policy, which I think is the way to go.
Yeah. The problem, like, so the very first time I ever did experiment with polyamory, the problem was one person was like, I want to meet your other partners. And the other partner was like, I want to do the don't ask, don't tell thing. And so like that was in conflict. And so that didn't work, you know? and that's where it gets difficult.
Is there a term for it? I just came up with don't ask, don't tell. Is that traditionally?
There might be, but there's so many
I don't know
terms around the poly relationship structures. There's like relationship anarchy, ethical non-monogamy, ethical, there's just so many different terms and stuff that like it can sometimes be hard to keep track. And I find myself still asking people, because I'm in like a poly Facebook group or two, even just to learn about it and to promote the show. We're probably gonna have a poly episode soon, which is exciting. But yeah, there's like all the time I'm like, wait, what does this term mean? All the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I feel like that's kind of what I do generally, but I just don't have a word for it because I'll date, but then I also, it's not like I'm seeking other dates. It's just kind of like the way it works, where you're as a traveling comedian or something. When we were traveling, it was just like, oh, like I always joke about it on the show. It's like I want to have a girlfriend like in every state. It would be cool, and it's not just for like, physical. It's just to have someone in town to eat with after a show.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's kind of funny because the reason why I want to do that is because I don't want to feel that guilt of like, because you said it before, it's like we're all, even people that have the traditional marriages that are like, oh, I haven't cheated on my spouse. I feel like you are. If you have like a work husband or whatever, they're fulfilling a need that your, whatever your overworking spouse doesn't fulfill. And I just feel like it's something that happens no matter what. And if you watch it in TV, and I was watching a movie last night, My Idiot Brother with Paul Rudd. It's like from 2011, but like his sister in the show cheats on her significant other, and it's like they already know that it's going to happen. It's like why can't we just accept that? Why can't we just somehow make it so it's not a deal breaker like it was for you in these past relationships?
Yeah. And so there's the open relationship structure, which I think is kind of more that, where it's like we're together, we do our own thing separately, and that works for a lot of people too. So there's a lot of different options, which is the nice thing about polyamory. But yeah, and the funny thing too is like the second relationship that I got cheated in, the most recent one, we had discussed being non-monogamous for various reasons, and he was the one who was like, I don't think I'm like ready for that. And then he was the one who cheated. And he came to me and was like, hey, like, guess what? I met this girl. And he was like excited about it. And I was like, okay, except that like we specifically decided, he thought that like, even though we had landed on not being polyamorous, that I would just be like, okay with him reintroducing this idea without like asking me.
Wait, so you found out about it from him?
Oh yeah, no, he came like immediately from her place to my place. Granted, I also like kind of knew because he was being like weird and avoidant the night before, and he was supposed to come over to my place. And then he was like, I'm just gonna crash here. And I was like, this feels fishy with the way he's like not responding to me. And so then he messaged me in the morning and he was like, hey, can I come over and we can talk? And basically he like slept with this girl. And he was like, he thought that he had like found a solution to some of our relationship problems by like bringing this other girl into the mix. And I was like, okay, that would have been okay if we had decided that that was the thing, but you literally were the person who, said that you didn't want this. And that was where we had landed. So this is like a betrayal of my trust now,
So it's basically, he didn't want you to be in an open relationship when you guys.
I don't really know what his logic was behind it. I mean, to be perfectly honest, the difference, or like the big thing was just like differing sex drives, right? And like particularly in the winter, I tend to maybe have a little bit lower sex drive, and that was why I was like, you know what, like if you like, we could do poly, and then you could go sleep with other people. And he was like, I don't know, I don't think that's a good idea, like, and then he went and did it anyway. So and then he came at me like it was going to fix all of our issues because like now he has this other person to have sex with. And I was like, but what?
Wait, going back to, you said you have a lower sex drive in the winter time?
Yeah, because of like seasonal depression.
Okay.
Yeah, so, the darkness, it gets to me. the cold in the dark.
I didn't even think of that, but yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, so maybe you just do seasonal monogamy.
Yeah. Hey man, if it works, it works. Like, yeah.
I mean, you can date with someone for like 3 months, and then winter you'd be like, all right, let's see we're poly in December.
Yeah. I mean, if they're open to that, I'm open to lots of different arrangements. I think it just matters on what works for the people involved.
Seasonal monogamy. That I'm writing this down. It's either a good idea or a good band name. One of these things.
That is a good band name. I like it.
Have you, so you do production. So for comedians, I always tell people, don't shit where you work. We don't date other comedians. For you, do you have that same? You guys aren't really in the same. I mean, you guys do jobs in a separate way. What do you? Let me just ask, do you date other people in your industry?
I also tend to avoid it. I think, some of it is like we could end up working together. Some of it is, it would be nice for one of us to have a stable career in a relationship. I think my work can kind of become my life a little too much as it is. And if I'm dating somebody else who's also working in a similar field, who's really passionate about it and who tends to make that work their life, then I would worry that like we just together would like end up making work our whole life and even our relationship.
But what professions are like also are deal breakers for you? Are there, like for me, I used to be a lawyer, so I won't date other lawyers. I won't date other comedians. Are there things that you've had experiences with where you're like, I'm not gonna date someone that has a 9-to-5, or I'm not gonna date creative?
Honestly, I think the only thing would be probably I wouldn't want to date somebody who works in politics, and I mean like on the Hill,
sure,
primarily, not like just random small like local politics. Although I don't know, like it that can also be a career where people's jobs take over their lives a lot. Yeah. And they might not be around, they might not be able to like commit to things, and I get like that's a problem for me too sometimes. Like I'll have shoots come up at the last minute and I'll have to cancel plans, which I know is less than ideal for somebody that I'm dating. And but so it's like if we can avoid having two people with those kinds of jobs where they have last minute stuff coming up and work crazy hours, then I think that's for the best. But I don't really have any other deal breaker careers.
Well, I think in DC, like that makes sense because I think a lot of people are there for that. But I mean, if you're just talking about people that are on the Hill, you can still date lobbyists or people that are political adjacent, right?
Yeah. I think it just kind of depends on like how much of their life work takes over, and also, a little bit what are their political leanings. If they're lobbying like pro cigarettes, as someone who doesn't even date smokers, I'm probably not going to date them. But okay. Yeah.
Well, so now that we're closing in on this pandemic being over, do you think you're going to go back on the apps, or have you tried some of the other new apps that are out there, or are you just sticking to parties and
I might try some of the newer apps, but then of course with those, there's the problem of adoption and like, are there enough people on it to make it worthwhile? But there's some interesting ones, right? Where like your friends can pick for you. There's one for dog owners, there's some interesting ones that I'm open to trying. I think I'd probably avoid a lot of the main ones. The other thing is like, I am bisexual and it can be really hard as a woman to meet women. So I have contemplated going back on the apps and just setting it to women only to try to give that like a more serious go, because I haven't really dated women. I've like hooked up with women, but I haven't actually like really dated them. And so like, it would be nice to try to actually date a woman. And it's just been really hard to like make that happen for whatever reason.
When did you discover that you were bisexual?
Oh God, I was such a late bloomer on that front. Like, I think I had my first real crush on a girl when I was like 26. And then I was still like, oh, well, that's like an exception, to the rule. But then I realized maybe when I was like 29, I was like, nah, I think this is actually a thing. Because I had like more and more girl crushes. And I think it was just partially because it was stigmatized that I had to like really, really like a girl before I would like admit to myself that it was a crush. And like I had like made out with girls tons when I was younger. There's like college stereotype, but like whatever. So I don't know why I was in such denial about it for a long time, but yeah, I was like 29 when I finally was like, okay, I'm bisexual.
You physically acted upon a crush. Okay. Why? What was the shame? Was it because of how you grew up, or just societal norms?
Yeah, I think just societal norms. Like my parents are pretty liberal, although like my dad definitely grew up in a maybe more conservative area, and he used to kind of imply that he would be a little bit uncomfortable if I turned out to be a lesbian. But he's actually gotten more liberal as he's gotten older, which I know is kind of the reverse of the stereotype. So now I don't think he'd care. But no, it was really mostly just society and me like assuming that I was straight and thinking like, oh, I don't know if it's okay for me to be attracted to women.
Huh. I think I have a friend who did the show, who was bisexual, but she predominantly dated men, and then now she's in like a 3-year relationship with a woman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I know other women who have also like only dated men, and then now they're like marrying other women or whatever. Yeah. I think it's been hard for me to meet other women. I mean, partially because you don't know, right? And like, how do you ask? How do you bring that up? How are you like, hey, are you interested in women? Because I'm interested in you, especially if you don't want to like, if they're like your friend or like a friend of your friend and you don't want to make it awkward or things like that. It's just like, I think it's a little harder yeah.
Well, I think you came up with the solution. I think for you, my opinion would be, still do the organic hopes of meeting people in real life, which I don't know how that's going to happen anymore. Not just because of the pandemic, but I also think societal norms are going to be even further apart, where strangers are not going to approach each other, or men aren't approaching women like they used to.
Yeah, I don't know though, because like with my show, a big part of the reason that it grew so much is because we did like after show hangouts, and people like, one of the like other pieces of feedback that I kind of incorporated when I was making the show is people missed meeting new people. Now, granted, I don't know if that's true everywhere. DC is a very transient city, so people are used to constantly meeting new people and are the kinds of people who like to constantly meet new people. That may be less true in, say, like smaller towns or things like that, where people maybe don't have as much of an emphasis on that. But
I think smaller towns, it still happens. But for me, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, where all the women I've ever dated, I've met at a bar. Most of the time, my most successful relationships were after midnight, where I met them. And that's me approaching them. It's probably when I had the balls to actually talk to somebody, is after I've been drinking. Now, I think that men are not going to do that as much because of the repercussions of, invading privacy, someone's space, or feeling like aggressive when that's kind of frowned upon now. So I think, obviously that's still going to happen. But for you, at least now, the things that you didn't like about online dating, if you said it's just women, you're not going to get the unsolicited.
That's true.
Pick or whatever. I think that's what you do. And then you hope for the organic stuff with men and women. And then you got these like Hinge and all that. I don't know. I'm a big advocate of the apps recently. And I was the other way around before this show started. 5 years ago, I never would have thought that most of the people I've met dating has been on the apps, but who knows?
Yeah. I mean, I think I would just say, I know like I'm glad that we're talking about consent and sexual harassment and all of that. And, but I don't think men should be like more afraid of approaching women. It's about how you approach, right? Like, do you take no for an answer? If you buy them a drink, are you then like expecting something in return?
Right.
And like those kinds of things. So I think like it's still totally fine to approach a woman and try to strike up a conversation. But if she's clearly not interested, then just back off and go like find someone else to approach. I think most women I know would say like, shoot your shot, but like do it respectfully and take no for an answer. Don't make me pretend that I have a boyfriend before you leave me alone.
Right. Well, you have a very reasonable approach to what is and is not acceptable. But what I've experienced, and I've told the story on the podcast before, where I'm out with my girls, that friends, and guys approach them in like the most benign way, and they're so aggressively shooting them down that I'm like, this is a nice guy. You guys just talked about how you don't like you never meet nice guys. A guy was very respectable, came up and just said, hey, how was your night tonight? And then someone shits on their whole ego with like, get away, or whatever. I, to be honest, like I've actually experienced that too. And I'm definitely not disrespectful to anybody. And I just feel like, I think that you're gonna see more of that, especially with germs and the virus too, where guys will touch someone on their back, be like, hey, how are you guys doing? And then freak people out unknowingly.
Yeah, well, and I would say like, if just as like tips, like don't touch somebody, because that's a consent thing. Like, I didn't really like that. Never used to bother me until I like because I used to work in the business world a lot and interview a lot of businessmen, and they were always touching me. And like, which sounds weird, but just like, just on the small of my back, nothing like too bad, but it adds up. And then like, I didn't kind of realize how much it bothered me until I stopped working so much in the business world. And that didn't happen to me for a long time. And then it did again. And then I was like, oh, why is this person touching me? Like I would say, try to avoid touching them without their permission. Like if you're talking for a while and you're like flirting, then cool. Like, maybe do like a little thing, but like, just walking up and putting your hand on them right away is going to be potentially jarring, especially after the pandemic, like you said.
100%.
I would say the other thing is just like, I do get some women might be a little aggressive about shooting people down, even when people are respectful, but try to remember, like, some women get hit on a lot and it gets just tiring on its own. And I'm not saying don't shoot your shot, but just try to not take it personally, I guess, because it might just be that, that you might be the fourth person that's hit on her that night.
Right.
And she's just kind of over it. And she just wants to be there with her friend or whatever.
You don't know what they're going through either, especially now people are, maybe they're in it's a seasonal depression thing too.
Yeah, exactly.
In December in Chicago, especially, but who knows?
Yeah.
Emma, thank you so much sorry, went over time a little bit here.
Oh, it's okay.
But tell people more about the on the Game Show of Love and how they can find out more about you and the projects you're involved with.
Awesome. Yeah. So the Game Show of Love, you can go to gameshowoflove.com to apply. It's super fun, very positive, not like a drama thing. It's not a reality show. It's a game show. We play getting to know you games. So it's very lighthearted. The application is on our website, lots of info on our website. You can also follow us on social media at Game Show of Love. And then we have a Facebook group. That's really where our community lives. And it's nice because people go, they post asking for dating advice. They post funny memes. They post interesting articles. So if you want to just chat about dating, come join our Facebook community. And if you want to find out more about me and the other work that I do, you can go to sunnysidevr.com. Before the pandemic, I was a virtual reality and video producer. I'm doing more of that again now that things are opening up. But that's me.
Awesome. And for the game shows to be a contestant, are there any limitations? Like, can you be 50 years old and a felon?
So I don't ask about people's felony history, and you can be any age as long as you're 18 and older. And we accept any race, any religion, any sexual orientation, any gender identity. Just you have to be 18 and older. We do like interviews and we do like try to screen people for like, major problems, but I don't ask about people's felony history because I think that's a delicate sort of matter, but yeah.
Okay. Well, Emma, thank you so much for doing the Singles Only podcast. Everyone go check out the Game Show of Love. It's a really cool concept. And I hope it keeps going and growing and growing. And thank you all for listening to another edition of Singles Only podcast or watching. I don't know what you guys are doing right now. Please review, subscribe us, tell your friends, and see y'all soon.